Welcome to Tom's True Crime. Today we take you to Tallahassee, Florida. Also, I'd love to know, where are you from? March 2018. This is George Stanvarro. I got a man that's been shot. It seemed like a relatively normal evening in Tallahassee, Florida, but George Stanvarro was in for the surprise of his life when his neighbor, Paige Neutek, crawled to his house, barely clinging to life. The scene was horrific. In the distance, his house was engulfed in flames. George immediately called 911. "All right, sir, I have a few questions that I need to ask you. And we've also got a house on fire out here." "And the house is on fire?" "Yes. Sir, I have to ask you these questions, okay? I don't know any more details. I've got to hang up and help him." "Where is he?" "He's right here." "Is he bleeding?" "Yes, he's bleeding." "Yes, he's awake." "Okay, what part of the body was injured?" "I don't know." "I don't know." "Sir, I need to know where he was shot." "I don't know. But I've got to go." First responders rushed to the scene, where they found that the truth of the incident was much darker and more twisted than they ever could have imagined. It wasn't just a man suffering from gunshot wounds, but a man who had also just watched his entire family be killed. This was no random break-in. James knew the assailant, and he made that clear to police. The Neutek family was the poster of a wholesome suburban family with Christian values. James Neutek and his wife Emily had 3 children together. 16-year-old Paige was their eldest and their only daughter. The boys, Eddie and Frank, were 13 and 8. James was a pastor, and the Neuteks were very involved with their church. Paige sang in a church choir and often sang solos. It's been said that Paige's voice would sometimes move the church crowd to tears. Paige's rebellious phase manifested in the form of her 18-year-old boyfriend, Bert Kinhauus. Paige's parents were slightly apprehensive of him at first, as any parent would. It started out like a lot of teenage romances. The pastor's daughter found a bad boy that she just couldn't resist. He was a couple of years older and didn't quite put her dad's mind at ease, but his little girl was happy. At 16 years old, it was expected for Paige Neutek to have a rebellious phase, but not quite this way. James Neutek recalls the first time Bert was invited for dinner, where he was immediately left with a bad impression. James greeted him by saying, "You must be Bert," to which he responded, "Aren't you the genius?" Despite the impolite response, this didn't initially sound too many alarm bells, and Bert continued to join the Neuteks for dinner, even attending church with them. Although this could seem like just a sarcastic but harmless response, it's actually a significant indication of Bert's antisocial traits. At 18 years old, and given the fact that he was meeting his girlfriend's parents for the first time, any typical teenager would have been more careful and more respectful when responding to James's greeting. It's certainly not a greeting that you would give to someone you're trying to impress. It's possible that Paige could have contributed to Bert's confidence and lack of respect. It's possible that Paige had been speaking poorly of her family to Bert. This could be another reason why Bert arrived with such an arrogant attitude. As time went on, James and Emily noticed a change in Paige's behavior. She was closed off to everyone except Bert. They would often seclude themselves from the rest of the churchgoers after service, and sometimes engage in public displays of affection that were seen as inappropriate for a Sunday service. The parents tried to put a stop to it by limiting the time the couple spent together. They set rules such as Bert hanging out at their house so that they would be there to supervise. He was to leave by 9 p.m. on school nights, and Paige could use her cell phone to talk to him until 10 p.m. This didn't slow their quickly intensifying relationship, however, and Bert bought Paige a promise ring. The fact that Paige was closed off to everyone except Bert can be considered pretty typical of her age. Adolescents can become obsessed with a boyfriend or girlfriend and can act like there's no one else in the world besides that person. It's strange how no other behavioral descriptors are given about Paige from her parents that indicate antisocial personality disorder. Maybe Paige showed more concerning behaviors, but her parents may have minimized or dismissed them. When it was clear that the relationship would continue to cause problems, as long as it went on, Emily put her foot down and said the two had to stop seeing each other. Their intentions were to keep their daughter safe, but they never could have imagined the danger that was on the horizon. The night that James crawled to his neighbor's house, he had seen things that were straight out of a horror movie. The Neuteks were sound asleep when James and Emily's bedroom door swung open with a bang. Several more loud bangs followed. This time, gunshots. Bullets showered the room where they had been sleeping peacefully, just seconds ago. Both James and Emily were shot multiple times. James recognized the assailant with the gun. It was Paige's boyfriend, Bert. He was accompanied by his friend, who would later be identified as Leo Adanskel. Along with guns, they were also carrying 2 large swords. James was lying in his bedroom, unable to move, when he heard his son, Eddie, cry out, "Why are you doing this, Bert?" More gunshots followed. Adanskel had shot 13-year-old Eddie in the face. The fact that swords were used adds to the horrific nature of these murders. Almost like Bert and his friend, Leo Adanskel, were enjoying the process, acting like it was the scene of a movie and they were the villains. Or maybe they thought of themselves as the heroes. Bert and Adanskel could have committed these murders with guns alone. Swords were unnecessary to accomplish what they wanted, which displays the profoundly evil intent. And it indicates that the 2 men gained some sort of satisfaction from the process. Frank, at only 8 years old, hid in the corner of a closet. It is unfathomable, the fear that the little boy must have felt, hearing his family being brutally murdered all around him at the hands of his sister's boyfriend, knowing he would be next if they found him. Tragically, Bert and Adanskel found him in the closet. The pair both stabbed Frank to death with the swords. After, Bert went back to Paige's parents' bedroom and stabbed Emily in the neck with a sword to ensure that she died, nearly debilitating her. Once the 2 were sure they had killed everyone, they set the house on fire and drove away. They never expected that James would make it out of the burning house alive. James had been in and out of consciousness during this traumatic event. Still, James fought for his life to make it out of the house and to his neighbors. It wasn't long after Paige Neutek had named the killer that the police tracked Bert down. In fact, Chief Deputy Ron Jones knew him well because he was a friend of Jones's son. On his way to the crime scene, Jones recognized Bert's car, where it was parked at David Adanskel's single-wide trailer on his way to the crime scene. David was Leo's older brother. His house became the spot, one where Leo and his friends could crash after a drunken night. When Jones arrived, David let the police enter the home, but he couldn't recall if Bert had stayed the night there or not. Upon entry, the officers were faced with a mess of empty beer cans and dirty laundry. Adanskel and his girlfriend were woken up by the officers that were looking for Bert. While searching the home, Jones discovered a door frame that had been covered up with a blanket. He pulled back the blankets to discover Bert lying on a mattress with a gun next to him. He had to be cautious. Bert had just slaughtered an entire family. Who was to say that he wouldn't reach for the gun lying next to him and shoot? Jones asked Bert to show him his hands and then took the teen outside and told him what had happened to the Neutek family the night before. Bert denied any involvement, claiming he got drunk that night and fell asleep. Because he was only wearing blue jeans, officers went inside to grab Bert a shirt and shoes. When they retrieved his clothes, they noticed blood splatters. As he was taken away in the back of a squad car, firefighters were still struggling to smother the fire that swallowed the Neutek home. Despite their efforts, the entire house burned to the ground and the bodies were eventually recovered. As police searched the trailer, they discovered a purse with Paige's driver's license, shell casings and ammunition, and a used condom. As an officer began to tear away at piles of clutter, he saw a pile of blonde hair peeking out of one of the piles and grabbed it, assuming that it was a doll. It was a teenage girl lying in a fetal position, facing away from the officer. The officer demanded she stand up and put her hands where he could see them, but she didn't respond at all. He recognized her from the driver's license. It was Paige. Immediately, Paige began asking where she was and saying that she couldn't remember how she got there. She claimed that she'd been drugged the night before and didn't have many details to offer police. She claimed that she remembered a fire, 2 men in black with swords, and drinking something. After the drink, she couldn't remember anything, and her memories of earlier in the night were also blurry. Police felt sorry for Paige and praised her strength in light of an event as traumatic as the loss of most of her family. However, as the story unraveled down at the station, it would come to light that this was not the case. Paige Neutek was certain he already knew Bert's motive. He wanted revenge because Emily had forbidden Paige from seeing him. Bert's version of the story, however, was not one of rage, but of his willingness to do anything for the girl he loved. He claimed that he hadn't killed the Neutek family for revenge. He did it because Paige asked him to. Back at the station, Bert was extremely forthcoming. Although he initially wouldn't name his accomplice, eventually he cracked. It was Leo Adanskel. When Bert says, "I'm very sorry for what I did," he sounds sincere. But his tone seems matter-of-fact, or almost like he is sorry, but he was going to do this no matter what. Like it was inevitable that he was going to commit these murders. I'm sure you're completely sorry by making the people that could have stopped it pay a price for it. I know the story, but I just think that if this interview carries any weight, if what you've told me is true, that you genuinely are sorry, you clearly find it difficult talking about this person who was looking after the gun for you, who was asked to do this originally, who backed out, who knew you were going to do it, and yet didn't say anything about it. The promise was made, and I can't break it. I still can't tell you this guy's name. It's interesting how people with antisocial personality will commit horrific acts, but then claim to stand by principles like keeping a promise. As Bert says, a promise was made and I can't break it. However, in this circumstance, Bert may have said this as an excuse to avoid disclosing the name. Bert did, however, seem to speak with conviction and, oddly enough, loyalty. It's also very possible that Bert was trying to make himself sound righteous, or like he was trying to do the right thing in front of the investigator. Adanskel had agreed to help his friend carry out the murders because he'd been promised $2,000 by Paige and Bert. The $2,000 was in a lockbox in the Neutek home. Adanskel was easily convinced, intending to use this money for court fees to assist in trying to gain custody of his daughter. Contrary to his plan, murdering 4 people and setting a house on fire would prove to not be the best approach. During their interrogations, the boys were extremely forthcoming about their acts and even led the police to the evidence that they had left under the bridge and in the river. According to the boys, Paige, Adanskel, and Bert were driven to the Neutek home by Adanskel's girlfriend, Erica Miller. Adanskel claims that Erica didn't know of their plan, but insisted on tagging along. They weren't at the Neutek home for long before they were scared away by the family's dog, who immediately started barking loudly. Paige was not going to let this be the end of her plan. She called Bert repeatedly in the late hours of the night, coercing him to come back and kill her parents. She said she would bring the dog inside so it didn't wake anyone up, but the boys were still hesitant. So Paige sneaked out with them. Eric drove the 3 of them to a cemetery where they sat for an hour and planned the murders of the Neutek family. Bert said he attempted to reason with Paige multiple times, suggesting she run away from home instead. She insisted that she wanted them permanently gone, and not just her parents. She wanted her little brothers killed too. She said they were annoying and they picked on her. The series of events described show the severity of Paige's and Bert's antisocial personality disorder. They extensively thought through their plan. This case was certainly not a heat of the moment or anger-fueled murder. The murders were very carefully thought out by 2 people who have no empathy and likely no conscience. Paige was apparently not disturbed by the thought of making her family suffer and putting her parents and 2 brothers through such a horrible experience, an execution-style murder. It's very likely that Paige either had a deep, long-standing hatred for her family, or her psychopathy is so severe that she truly just wanted them out of her way. She had no issue with disposing of the lives of her parents and brothers. This is likely antisocial personality at its most severe, because even the worst psychopaths in history will tend to go after strangers. Those who plan and engage in not only murder, but murder carried out in such a brutal manner toward their own family, are really the most dangerous types of sociopaths. The term menace to society is really made for individuals like Paige, because if she could plan something like this to happen to her own family, imagine how horrific her behavior towards others she didn't know well could have potentially been. According to their plan, Leo Adanskel was to kill the boys while Bert carried out the murders of her parents. They burst into the house with a .22 caliber pistol and 2 samurai swords. They almost successfully carrying out their plan if James hadn't survived. What seemed to affect Bert the most about that night was being ordered by Adanskel to make the kids come out of the locked room they were hiding in. Little Eddie attempted to fight Bert off but was shot by Adanskel immediately. Bert said that he couldn't handle murdering 8-year-old Frank, although he did stab him once. Leo Adanskel recalled Paige being elated after the murders when they returned to the car with her packed suitcase. Once she had the confirmation that her family was gone, she gave them the combination to the lockbox that contained the money. They also took all the money from James and Emily's wallets, which added up to about $500. They then set furniture and blankets on fire with cigarette lighters, watching the house go up in flames as they pulled away in Erica's car. Paige shouted, "That was awesome." She told the others how relieved she felt. She was so happy. They went to the river, where they tossed Paige's suitcase, the swords, and bloody boots in a box. Their plan was to come back for these items. Finally, Erica dropped Paige and Bert off at David Adanskel's trailer. They celebrated their completed mission by sleeping together. When Erica was questioned, she pleaded ignorance to the whole thing. She finally cracked when she learned that the police already had the two boys in their custody. She confessed to everything. While Leo, Adanskel, Bert, and Erica were all telling stories that corroborated with each other, Paige was still sticking to her story that she didn't remember anything. The results of her toxicology report had just come in. There were no drugs found in her system and no signs of smoke inhalation. Back at the hospital, Paige Neutek was recovering despite all odds being against him. He suffered fractured cheekbones, broken nose, and nerve damage in his right arm. When detectives came to talk to him, he asked about his daughter's involvement in the deaths of their family. They said one earth-shattering sentence that would make James's suffering so much heavier. Her involvement was deep. He immediately cried out in despair. It was inconceivable that his sweet little girl could have done something so evil. Upon being told he could go home, he broke down again. He had nothing. He didn't have a home to go to, or anyone to come home to. He stayed with his sister as he continued to live out the nightmare that had become his reality. Paige was placed under arrest, but denied her involvement through tears. Because she was a minor, she couldn't be questioned immediately. The small, blonde 16-year-old was not the suspect they had imagined. Someone who was the mastermind behind this gruesome plot, to have her family killed. She wouldn't agree to speaking with investigators, choosing to write a statement instead. Still, she didn't budge from her story. Paige Neutek was placed in a juvenile detention center, where she was held on murder charges. Paige Neutek visited Paige at the juvenile detention center, but because every conversation they had was recorded and could be used against her in trial, he couldn't ask her any questions such as why had she done such a heinous thing. Still, he had been shown every piece of evidence by investigators, so he knew all of the disturbing details. Despite having every reason to stop visiting Paige, James continued. Paige was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 25 years for capital murder on January 2, 2019. Bert Kinhauus and Leo Adanskel were both given life without the possibility of parole for their crimes. Erica was sentenced to 40 years. James still visits with Paige. In fact, he fights for her early release. Despite seeing the evidence, he still can't bring himself to believe that his daughter could be capable of such a thing. She has told him different stories about the events that took place the night that the Neutek family was killed. In one, she told him that Bert Kinhauus wanted them dead, and her phone calls to him that night were her trying to talk him out of it. Paige Neutek believes that Paige didn't truly think Bert would follow through with the acts. Unbeknownst to him, Bert Kinhauus was not the first person that Paige had tried to employ to carry out her plan. A previous boyfriend claimed that Paige had asked him to carry out the same crime when they were dating. This ex-boyfriend of hers was not willing to go to the lengths that Bert was to make her happy. He thought she was crazy and immediately told her to leave. This fact reveals a couple more details about Paige and her severe psychopathy. She was likely very manipulative, particularly with her boyfriends. She may have used various manipulation tactics such as urging her past boyfriend to do this for her to keep her happy. She may have also used this approach with Bert. In the interrogation recording, Bert almost sounded as if what he did was inevitable. He also sounded genuinely remorseful, almost like he had to do it. This fact about Paige also reveals that she was planning this for a long time, even before Bert was her boyfriend. She was planning the murders of her parents and brothers, all while living with them, going to church with them. She was able to interact with her family normally, on a daily basis. Her ability to do this while having the desire to see them dead shows her profound detachment from emotion, her lack of empathy, and the absence of any moral conscience. Paige Neutek has remarried since the murders and had one more biological child. He and his new wife also adopted 3 children. Paige may be eligible for parole someday, but Bert Kinhauus and Leo Adanskel will spend the rest of their lives in prison. Thank you for being with us. If you'd like to support our channel and help us to continue to make content, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us so much and we really appreciate it.